There's no way around it. Police in Norway are much better trained than police in the United States. Some of our law enforcement officers don't seem to even really remember the laws they enforce.
In order to detain somebody, what do you have to have legally?
I do not know the law legally.
Okay.
And let's be real, I could have picked a way worse example of police misconduct. A lot needs to change in American policing. I'm gonna assume you're already aware of its issues and brutality, so instead of focusing on that, we're diving into police training as a root cause of some of those problems. Granted, these are probably bigger root causes, but we're just covering training, its many problems, and how it can improve. Also, hi, I'm Hendo. I moved from LA to Oslo and am fascinated by the differences between the US and Norway, including police training. These are all the topics I'm going to cover and areas where I think the American system could learn from the Norwegian one. The Norwegian one's not perfect, but the system here is a far cry from the brutal one back home because, once again, the bar is in hell. Real quick, can we even compare these two countries? It is apples to oranges, but it's not apples to chairs. Come on. These are both wealthy Western nations with similar cultures that spend a similar portion of GDP on domestic policing. They have similar rates of police per capita and a similar proportion of immigrants. Norway and the US have enough in common to compare, but this also isn't prescriptive. America can't and shouldn't do exactly what Norway is doing. I'm just saying we could put down the American exceptionalism for a second and just steal the best parts of how police training works in other countries. Who trains the police depends on how policing is organized, centralized or decentralized. Norway is centralized, meaning there's one federal authority that decides on police standards and minimum training. It's got like a dash of decentralization though, because the operational police work is broken up into 12 districts, so they can build on that minimum and cater to more local needs. But the whole country gets access to cops with the same training done by that one central authority with its one police university. But silly Europeans, why would you have a one standard when you can have 18,000? Oh yeah, 18,000 different police departments with different rules, baby. It's a free-for-all! The US is highly decentralized, with no federal or state level authority for police standards or training. It all comes down to the departments, who can decide to train police via one or a combination of over 700 police academies and programs. This is why reform never feels like it's working. Aside from not being enforced, it takes all departments or all academies deciding to implement changes. That's why the most immediate reform that US experts advocate for is a centralization of minimum training standards, like Norway does. It's not that crazy. The US military has a centralized training standard. But anyway, the hardest part of the following comparison is that there's one clean system versus 18,000 different sets of training criteria. So bear with me and buckle up. American police get called to do so many different types of services, yet require less training on average than your typical barber or cosmetologist. 664 hours for cops and 1,000 hours for barbers? What are we doing? And it isn't even a fair comparison. Not that barbers aren't providing a valuable service, we all remember haircuts in lockdown, but policing is a high-contact public service that involves the power to take your rights away. So maybe we should compare training time to nurses or lawyers. In Norway, police do train about as long as nurses, around 4,500 hours or 3 years, and all graduate with a bachelor's degree. Some do another 1 or 2 years for a master's for higher ranks and specialties, but that 3-year bachelor's is the minimum and 4 times longer than the American average. US police departments require anywhere from 500 to 1,200 hours. The average is 806 hours of academy training and 503 hours of field training. So an average of about 8 months total. Huge disclaimer though, because functionally it's sometimes way less because 37 states allow police to start service before attending any academy training, like full-on uniform, badge, gun, authority to make arrests. Sometimes there's a few days or a couple weeks of training before they're thrown out there, but I'd be so nervous as a fresh police recruit who hasn't gone to academy and isn't super clear on laws or what my role is or how shit works. And as a community member, you might also be wondering, What the fuck? 1. Training is often seen as part of the job, not a necessary step before the job. I guess like Starbucks baristas making your drink while being trained. 2. Some departments are understaffed, so they need people to start right away. Do we not have like fully trained, well-paid reserves? And 3, it's sometimes that academy training starts at specific times of the year, so they're allowed to work until then, for anywhere from 3 months to 2 years. This is why the US average is all over the place. 500 hours is the lowest minimum, 8 months is the practical average, but the majority of states also allow fully powered police with 0 academy training, maybe a couple weeks if we're lucky. Imagine if we let nurses do that, like here's your scrubs, needle, and paycheck, have at it, you'll start school soon. Now, they're typically partnered with an experienced field training officer, or FTO, and things are usually fine, but it's well known internally that officers don't typically like to train rookies, and it's not a coveted position. It's even sometimes a punishment. Some FTOs express a sentiment of, forget academy, we'll show you how police work is really done. Derek Chauvin, one of the men convicted for the murder of George Floyd, was an FTO who was also field training 2 of the other officers convicted. And those 2 had just completed academy. I can't imagine what that dynamic is like when the rookies haven't had any basic training. Norwegian police don't start field training until their 2nd year. By this point, they've had over 1,000 hours of foundational policing education and don't get a gun or full arrest authority. I had just assumed America was doing something reasonable like that, so anyway, back to the fairly short training period that you can apparently completely bypass before service. What about quality over quantity? Maybe longer training isn't necessarily better and America's just super efficient. We'll unpack quality in a second, but it's important to note that acquiring a new skill does typically require a minimum amount of time, about 500 hours for proficiency. So makes sense that barbers train for around 1,200 hours to learn multiple skills, not just hair cutting, but hairstyling, hygiene, chemical handling, etc. Police also need to learn lots of new skills. Don't make it longer the way it is. Make it longer to accommodate the communication skills we'll get to in a minute. Topics are also usually taught in blocks, where it's one after the other all at once because it's cheaper for instructors to come for the day or week. This creates a cognitive load issue where the brain can't really retain that much information all at once. I'm sure cops are trying, but a continuous chunk of 18 hours is probably not enough time to learn everything you need to about mental illness. In Norway, it's a variety of classes for an entire semester, and 6 semesters total, so it really sinks in. You spend the first year in school, the second year in the field, and the third year back in school, and that mix is also really good for learning and retention. Again, I'm not like blaming American police individually, but the system's in a rut, and it could really benefit from longer training that's also spaced out so cops get a chance to really learn, like they do in Norway. Because in addition to the quantity being low, the quality is also varied. It's well known that American police training tends toward a warrior mindset, emphasizing force and control over problem solving and communication. It leads to overly suspicious, hypervigilant, and aggressive policing with a cynical attitude towards the police and even towards civil rights. A major example is this pseudoscientist who has trained police in every state for years, Dave Grossman, the biggest name in police training who teaches cops how to kill.
You're a transformed creature, you're a predator. What does a predator do? They kill. Only a killer can hunt a killer. If you fully prepare yourself, in most cases, killing is just not that big a deal.
Yeah, so he says that cops need to be prepared to kill as an almost automatic reaction because every encounter is a potential threat and every single traffic stop could be your last. The officer who killed Philando Castile 40 seconds into a traffic stop had attended Grossman's Bulletproof Warrior program. Now Grossman has moved away from the term warrior and sticks to the term sheepdog. Police are sheepdogs that fight wolves, and while they don't hurt the sheep, they're capable of violence at the moment of truth. Which led me to Google this stupid question: do sheepdogs ever accidentally kill sheep? To which the answer is, yeah, that happens sometimes. when they're untrained. Sheepdogs killing lambs is a huge no-no, and you remove or retrain them real quick. And that's aside from the us versus them problem of them being criminals, inherently violent, and a separate species that can't be changed or helped. Also, it goes without saying, but killing is not justice. Dead people cannot answer for their crimes. Grossman isn't the only trainer, but he's definitely a pioneer, he's often a guest speaker, and he's inspired lots of other companies. Check out this video for a good breakdown of how Grossman has deeply influenced police training. This fear-inducing warrior training also holds that the first rule of law enforcement is to go home alive at the end of every shift, not to protect and serve. This is a military style of training despite police not being at war with anyone. They are part of and serve the public. Policing is a potentially dangerous job, but it's not the most dangerous. It's like 22nd on the list. And only 4% of police calls involve a violent offender. Police are very infrequently assaulted, actually injured, or even killed. Not to diminish the risk, just to keep it in perspective. Maybe it's not ideal to react when a threat is merely possible instead of probable.
Retired Minneapolis Police Sergeant Michael Quinn isn't a fan of the training.
If you fear for your life on every little startling moment on this job, you're in the wrong job.
Compare all of this to the Guardian mindset, which emphasizes policing by consent, operating via community respect and acceptance rather than fear and submission. This, of course, is the standard at Norway's police university. The emphasis is communication, especially through de-escalating procedural justice. An example of this is lead. Listen to people who are confused or in pain, explain what's going to happen to them and how the process works, ensure equity by being very transparent, and do so with the person's dignity in mind. Don't scream at, harass, or humiliate them. The Norwegian Police University is, quote, focused on communication and gradually introduces use of force weapons over a 3-year period. Their role is to de-escalate the situation. Most often, that's done through effective communication. The first thing they learn is the role of police in society and how to work with a community in order to protect it. They learn that every act of police violence will affect their relationship with the community, so they really need to have good judgment. And in the States, there is an effort, or at least desire, to move away from warrior training and toward guardian training. But again, with 18,000 plus agencies and current political climate, it's hard to know if that's actually happening. It is in some places, but not most places. Police violence outcomes reflect that this training is still a problem. Whereas Norwegian police killed 8 people between 2005 and 2021, American police kill about 1,000 people per year. Adjusting that to per capita, that's a ratio of about 2 to 33. There has been one day so far this year in which an American officer hasn't killed someone. And the big question is, are these accidents, or are they doing what they were trained to do? I'd like to think that most cops want to learn those guardian communication skills, but let's get to comparing the training specifics. Police training involves many different types of skills. Cognitive skills, social types of skills, moral and ethical. Guess what type America focuses on?
Charm type.
No, it's gun type. On average, U.S. police academies spend 18 hours on de-escalation and 73 hours on firearms training. Guns are dangerous and absolutely require time to learn, but can we bump up those hours on de-escalation? Which I have to point out is also called verbal judo. This is a DOJ document. Is de-escalation not manly enough? Anyway, when it comes to firearms training, some suggest that the number of accidental shootings indicates too much focus on target practice and too little on realistic operational handling. Many officers also get too little maintenance training to keep up those gun handling skills every year, because that's also up to the 18,000 different departments. All academies teach lethal and other kinds of force, like batons, tasers, physical restraint, wrestling, but only 23 states require what's called use of force training, understanding when to use various levels of force, how to avoid excessive force, and an emphasis on de-escalating methods. These are all illustrated by the force continuum. Side note, I usually see this one in Norwegian documents, and shocker, it has a more detailed bottom de-escalation section. almost as if that's their whole focus. Ideally, you'd always try de-escalating methods before using more forceful means. This is increasingly required by US departments, but it's also not clear if they're actually trained to wait for a response after giving commands. In the case of a Tatiana Jefferson, the officer didn't announce his presence at 2 in the morning outside of her house. Instead, he shouted commands and gave zero time to comply before shooting her dead through the window of her own home. That warrior training makes officers quick to use force, and it really deteriorates community trust. In Norway, de-escalation and communication are part of every semester, but they of course also get lethal force training. Norwegian police used to be deployed mostly unarmed, but that just changed to being armed now, so these standards might expand. Gun training is spread throughout their second year, and they take a test in their third year. After graduating, they do 48 hours of maintenance training and take the test again every year. I still can't believe that isn't standardized in the United States. Norwegian police learn not just shooting techniques, but how to handle stress and when they have the authority to shoot, because it should be an absolute last resort. Marksmanship is also important because accuracy is vital to damage-limiting shots aimed at the leg or less lethal areas. Think Fallout. It's harder to hit the limbs than the torso, but they're trying to incapacitate assailants without killing them. Norwegian police students also do a fair amount of realistic scenario training, which focuses less on big realistic sets like Atlanta's Cop City and more on realistic situations that allow for many response types that range from requiring de-escalation to requiring force. This gets students comfortable and confident in problem solving and decision making. And yeah, decision making and critical thinking are another skill we have to talk about. In the States, it's about instincts over critical thinking, and those instincts just have to be deemed objectively reasonable. And since these warriors always feel threatened, a lot gets called objectively reasonable. The police legal defense standard is essentially that judges and juries should not second-guess officers' split-second decisions, no matter how unnecessary a killing may appear in hindsight. Critics say this narrow focus on the moment an officer pulls the trigger obscures many questions about the many choices leading up to the confrontation. If you're never judged on those choices, it's no wonder that police training tends not to focus on them. On average, police get 13 hours of conflict management training and 16 hours on problem solving. And a lot of training is stress-based, a military style that emphasizes reaction over decision, sometimes even cultivating a bigger response.
My fear is that they underreact. We want to put them under stress, yes, but we want them to win.
Get mad, get mad. Aggression breeds aggression, okay? Be aggressive. I want you to be aggressive! I want you to be loud!
Stress exposure can be helpful, but the focus is rarely on learning to process emotional reactions and more on terminating a threat. There's this pervasive idea that police have so much adrenaline pumping that they can't be expected to make clear decisions. They can't even be expected to remember things correctly or have their reports match witness statements or video footage. Pseudoscientist Bill Lewinsky says, "This isn't lying, it's inattentional blindness, where the brain is so focused on the task, it can't process anything else." He does also admit that inattentional blindness is indistinguishable from lying, but he's still testified in over 200 defense cases, and he's trained police, helping to set this standard that officers can't be expected to remember their decisions, but they were objectively reasonable anyway. Norwegian police take at least 4 classes per semester for 3 years, where decision-making and problem-solving is the whole point. This study on decision-making by Norwegian police illustrates that even armed reactions do involve extensive decision-making. These officers also felt that adrenaline and physical stress like a racing heart and even obscured hearing. But they also describe assessing the situation. Even when they have to shoot pretty immediately, they report being aware of bystanders and aiming for the leg, and use de-escalation warnings first, even if the attacker was slowly approaching, which requires a lot of restraint and training and resiliency. Many police also described putting like a mental marker in their head for how severe things could get before they'd use their firearm. I think for a lot of American police, that mental marker is sudden movements, probably a little racism, and of course weapons, regardless of if they're legal or even visibly present. Compare that to this Norwegian officer saying, "I don't shoot until the subject is far across my limit, but that's probably because you want to avoid firing to the very end." A key part of their training is that killing is a last resort and is very difficult to live with. So police may make a split-second decision when they pull the trigger, but it's preceded by a lot of decision-making and analysis that's fostered by training. They feel that skilled intuition is an endpoint of learning and a central aspect of expertise. The goal is quick thinking, not quick shooting. Social skills and good decision-making also rely on emotional intelligence. This includes recognizing your own emotions and how they impact your behavior, controlling impulsive feelings and successfully regulating emotion, identifying others' emotional cues without letting your own interfere, and maintaining good relationships via communication and conflict management. Colleagues should feel comfortable calling each other out on bad behavior and taking criticism or correction. You might remember this clip where an angry officer yells at a handcuffed suspect that he'd remove his soul from his body and reaches for his pepper spray. So his colleague pulls him back and tells him to stop, and he responded by angrily grabbing her throat. Jesus. This guy was riled up by a suspect talking back to him, but didn't regulate his emotions and got aggressive, and let that aggression transfer to an officer that was obviously looking out for him, trying to keep him from pepper spraying a handcuffed man in the back of a cop car. Like, of course they're pissed off. They're being arrested. You already have him handcuffed in the car. You can't chill out. I get the criminals are scary. I'd be scared. But I'm not a trained officer, and I expect police to take the time to train their instincts and emotions. Think about falling. The natural human reaction is to stick out your arms, which is why falling often involves a broken arm. Parkour athletes, gymnasts, and stunt professionals spend a lot of time falling, so they relearn how to fall, rolling with momentum to reduce the risk of injury. It takes time and practice, and it works. Norwegian police training includes regular debriefings to promote discussion and teamwork and provide a healthy outlet for emotions. Recruits are also frequently being monitored and evaluated for their suitability to the role. Emotional intelligence is a big part of this, as the top 3 rated essential skills are inclusion, constructive teamwork, and self-development. American police could definitely use a culture shift, maybe a copy of that evaluation sheet, so we can cultivate emotional intelligence throughout training, both for the sake of the community and their own ability to survive a very stressful job. First and foremost, police enforce laws, but how they do so comes down to ethics, a sense of right and wrong. Formal laws are like a minimum protection, typically against what's wrong. Ethics are informal norms that reflect our morals, and they're more of a day-to-day guide of how to conduct ourselves and how to make decisions. Speeding is illegal, but an officer has to decide whether to give you a ticket, what type of ticket, whether to escalate the situation. It's legal to use force to apprehend a suspect, but is it ethical to tase him twice, kick him 7 times, and beat him with a baton 33 times, like in the case of Rodney King? While ethics are subjective, all fields of work, especially in the public sector, set standards for ethical operation. Police spend, on average, just 12 hours on ethics and integrity. This might help explain the U.S. police's many ethical violations, which are disproportionately against people of color. Like, they're not kind to poor white people either, but it's obviously worse on average for Black Americans. The majority of adults in the states do not think police treat different races equally. Red flag. Red flag. Racism is especially an issue of ethics. I mean, some forms of it are explicitly illegal too, but ethics are where police need to be addressing their own issues of racism, prejudice, classism, etc. 12 hours ain't doing shit. The Norwegian police have ethics classes for 5 out of 6 semesters. This is like kind of annoying at this point to talk about Norway. Norwegian police learn not just about formal institutions and informal norms, but address power relations, social control, and social inequality. Norwegian police have their ethical issues too. There's multiple reports of police racism and xenophobia, including from the UN. Their training is objectively more thorough, but I feel really shitty not mentioning more of these issues in brutality, oversight, or harassment in Norway. So sorry, Norway, to gloss over some of your issues, but I'm comparing it to a raging dumpster fire. The point is, their more fundamental understanding that crime intersects poverty, inequality, and mental health issues makes Norwegian police more likely to be compassionate and police ethically. So, in terms of the actual law, Norwegian police students spend 2 semesters on criminal law, and US recruits do 52 hours. But in that block format, that's hard to retain, hence that first clip I showed.
I do not know the law legally.
I don't think police need to be legal experts, but what she's missing here is reasonable suspicion, a legal standard so permissive, low, and widely utilized that every cop should know it. She's not the only one who's light on the legal knowledge. We have lots of cops caught on camera trying to arrest people for filming, peacefully protesting, flipping them off, or saying fuck the police. None of that is illegal. It's all free speech. But American cops get really mad and often try to detain people anyway and end up paying out legal settlements that cost the taxpayers a lot of money. These Norwegian cops are actually giggling while a drunk man curses at them, at one point calling him a horse pee-pee. I don't know what I can say on YouTube. I'm talking about police violence, that's probably fine.
Hvorfor roper du så høyt?
Da har faen ikke du noe med! Du forbanna hestkuk!
Jeg skjønner jeg ler, men svarer.
Granted, these officers know they're being filmed, and I'm sure that affects their behavior. Again, Norwegian cops have had their ethical violations too, but I couldn't find many incidents of them not knowing basic Norwegian law. The point is, American cops could use a better foundation in law and ethics, especially with in-service training to keep it fresh. So finally, let's touch on in-service training, the continued education you do after graduating academy while serving as an officer. Norwegian police don't have specific annual requirements. I've never been more motivated to learn Norwegian than trying to research this stuff. Anyway, ongoing training seems to depend on your role, and I don't know any general police, but I talked to an investigator who said he does 4 days every 6 months, so around 64 hours a year. But again, aside from that 48-hour gun minimum, I'm not sure. And no surprise that the 18,000 different American departments require anywhere from 40 hours a year to 0 of in-service training, but the average is around 21 hours. A lot of these shorter workshops seem to be where extra political messaging, junk science, and extreme tactics are introduced to the police force. This has included trips to Israel to learn policing methods that have obviously been intensely criticized. And even when regions try to implement bans, like on Dave Grossman's training, departments can sidestep them by attending workshops as civilians, even though that's banned too. They just kind of ignore it. Again, no centralized authority for oversight. So even if academy training can move away from the warrior mindset, it can make its way back in through these service workshops that keep officers in a constant state of fear, prone to using force. You probably remember this clip of a police officer overreacting to the sound of an acorn, which is a funny headline, but if you watch the clip,
Shots fired! Shots fired! You know. I'm hit!
like, that's crazy and really sad. What kind of constant state of fear must you be in to immediately turn around and shoot without any assessment of what's going on? And it's terrifying for the community. There's a woman screaming in that clip because she feared that the man handcuffed in the back of the car was hit by the officer. Like, everyone's scared, and it's a race to the bottom that's gotta change. We need minimum standards. Norwegians often ask me why the system hasn't changed, why Americans put up with such undertrained police upholding such a brutal system. Honestly, though confidence in police training is pretty low, confidence in local police is higher. A really hard truth is that a good chunk of the country is just happy with the way the police treat criminals, crime, and even ethnic and class minorities. People are having a hard time in America and they want to blame someone, maybe want to see someone suffer worse than they are. Norwegians may value rehabilitation for criminals, evident by their more humane prison system, but in the States, we're kind of just taught that criminals should be punished, should suffer. Even if it's inhumane, even if it doesn't work, even if it costs taxpayers more than rehabilitation would. But most people do recognize that there's problems with policing. 89% of adults in 2022 supported some kind of reform. They just don't agree on what. The most popular demand for reform is a change to general police training. But I do just want to mention that there are way more comprehensive proposed solutions to the problem of policing. A lot of these problems. Defund the police aims to reduce police funding and increase public service funding. And abolish the police aims to scrap the current corrupt system and rebuild public safety from the ground up. I know these sound scary, but I think that tends to be the reaction from people who don't honestly have much contact with the police. If your goal is effective change, I think your heart's in the right place, but remember that allies should listen and consider if they really know what's best. Ask yourself, have you ever been arrested or detained? Have you ever been the victim of a crime and tried to get justice? Do you spend more time interacting with police, crime, and poverty in real life or watching shows on TV? Have you listened to the many communities affected by policing? Based on a history of attempts at reform, I lean more toward defund or abolish movements, but I'd also never get in the way of efforts to reform training. Infighting sucks, and perfect shouldn't be the enemy of good. I'll help start anywhere, and this is my contribution. I like the Norwegian system of centralized standards, years of transparent training, and operation that caters to regional needs. But pick any country to learn from. Many require over 2,000 hours of training, some require more than Norway. There's so much research and so many programs that the American police could learn from. There's a lot that I wanted to get to but didn't have time for or wasn't exactly on topic, but I hope I get to cover a lot of it in a separate reform video. But I sincerely hope that this video helped illustrate the problems in police training and some of the ways we can improve it in the United States. If you liked it, please hit the subscribe button because it really helps me out, and check out all the sources below for yourself. I do hope to get to that reform video soon, but might need a break, especially depending on how this more controversial topic is received. But thank you so much for watching and for hearing me out, and I'll see you next time. Ha det!